Yeah.
What is the current record per pound?
The current record in the best of Panama is $10,000 a kilo. We changed to kilos.
Okay,
We recently changed to kilos.
$10,000 per
Per
kilo.
kilo, yeah.
And what is the lot size of that?
The lot size for that is 55 pounds.
So
No, 50 kilos.
No, 55 pounds.
55 pounds, 25 kilos.
25 kilos.
25 kilos.
Yeah. So that was recently reduced.
Roasted.
Really
super
expert in that space.
Nobody can beat anymore.
Infused
for 20, 30 years.
Because it tends to be their own
When you
job.
were working the land.
$1,000 per
Per
kilo.
kilo.
All right, so we are back for another episode of the Acid Makes Coffee Better podcast. And today we have Wilford Snr and Wilford Jr. from Lamastus Family Estates. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for
Drew.
spending your
Thank
time.
you,
Really
Drew.
appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you for the invitation.
Cool. So you guys are fairly famous in the coffee industry.
Thank you for
But for
that.
the people who don't necessarily know too much about Lamastus Family Estates, could you just give us a little intro onto your history and where you are now?
So you can start. Well, I can start. My great-grandfather started our company, Lamastus Family Estates. My great-grandfather, meaning my father's grandfather on the father's side, he came from building the Panama Canal, and he liked the weather and the mountains in Boquete that he visited a few years before that, before retiring from the Panama Canal. And when he visited the region, he decided to move in and start a coffee cultivar instead of going back home. And that's what he did. That's how we started it. You want to go a little bit deeper into that?
Yes.
Sorry, was that quite a common thing for people who are working on the Panama Canal to then just be like, okay,
Yeah,
what else can we do
that's a
here?
great question because that will link a little bit farther from my father's coffee history.
Okay,
The French started building the Panama Canal.
right.
Then the French failed on the building of the Panama Canal. And then when they failed on building the Panama Canal, they sold it to the Americans. But instead of going back home, many French workers of the Panama Canal, engineers or other type of workers, moved into Boquete, which was a very not populous town back then, but it had a nicer weather than the rest of Panama, the country that is fairly hot. And they built the first establishment of producing coffee and other type of crops. So my father's great-grandfather, on his mother's side, the Boquete family, they were also coffee producers. And he was one of the first ones to get the coffee farms. Actually, our farm El Burro, it's one of the properties that used to belong to him. So it was kind of a common thing that started the French, and then some Americans that work in the Panama Canal followed. But I think it was mostly the French. My father can correct me on that.
So, yeah, like he said, so when the French with Ferdinand de Lesseps came to build the Panama Canal, they failed. So in the early 1900s, they all moved to the Boquete area, including my great-grandfather, and some other known coffee growers from Boquete area, and they established coffee plantations. So, but on the other side, my grandfather on my father's side, he came to Boquete when he finished his duty in 1917 or so. He started looking for farms with other colleagues from the canal too, and then they
The former owner of Lerida, the founder of Finca Lerida, was really good friends of him.
Okay.
It was Tolef Monique.
yes, and
He ended up leaving because he had no family here, and he ended up leaving and selling it to another family.
Okay.
So they were partners working in the Panama Canal. They bought farms next to each other. We're neighbors still with Lerida. So the founder of Lerida, Mr. Tolef Monique, was my grandfather's very good friend. So they established farms in the 1980s, 1920s. But coffee started in the 1875 or so, 1885. Back then, the only variety planted was Típica.
They call it criollo.
Criollo.
Criollo means like Creole.
Creole.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Típica was the only variety planted back then. And so my grandfather married a local lady, local Panamanian lady. So did my other great-grandfather marry a local Panamanian lady. So they had families, a big family. On my mother's side, big family. My father's side, it's okay, family. So my father stayed with his brother. After his father died, his mother took over, and then his mother retired, and he kept the farm. And then I am the third generation, and Junior is the fourth generation now.
I can tell you a little bit more about the context of our history as a family. From my father's side, everybody is a coffee producer. Now, my father just mentioned you about his mother's side versus his father's side. His mother's side was from a wealthier, more opulent family, while his father's side was more of an ex-military from the Panama Canal security, married to a local lady with indigenous background, which was really more as a working class family. And they established a small farm in Elida State, very, very high up, very, very difficult to get there. Now, you can imagine the road you've driven to, but that one didn't exist. So it was very, very hard to get there. While my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather from the other side, the Boquete family, they had a lot of land, a lot of businesses, not only coffee. And they were also politicians, ambassadors, stuff like that. These two families were in coffee. And when my grandfather married my grandmother, he was partly helping his father-in-law, ended up buying the farm from his father-in-law, and he was working on the farm from his father-in-law, while also working on the farm he inherited from his mother. So my grandfather, a very hardworking coffee man, married into this wealthier family, better established. Also, he had his working mom that gave him the farm. And let's get back into the 50s. My great-grandmother, Elida, that's why the name is, that we named the farm Elida, she was one of the few, or maybe the only lady working in coffee. Back then, it was not used to having the lady working in the coffee farm, wearing pants. It's a different perception. But she widowed with a 2-year-old kid, with a month baby old, and a little bit older kids. But she had 5 kids, and she widowed that way. So she needed to continue working in the coffee farms. She was actually one of the founders of Beneficio Rio Cochea, which started as a co-op, and today is the mill where Creativa Coffee District
CCD,
operates.
right? Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So, it's a different time, but little by little, the tradition of coffee, the passion of coffee, the hard working in the coffee industry that my grandfather kept, his in-laws, his brother-in-laws did not follow through that way. So the Boquete family started losing or selling coffee land, while my grandfather on the Lamastus side kept working hard on coffee. He ended up buying one of his father-in-law's coffee farm. He continued with his mother's coffee farm. Eventually, in the 90s, my father and his brother bought the coffee farm El Burro from their uncle. They didn't even inherit it. So that's why Lamastus Family Estate is a stronger brand today as of Boquete coffee. We used to have the brand Boquete in the 90s, but now we strengthened the Lamastus because that's where the coffee continued. Even my father being a Boquete, he continued the farm being the only Boquete that continues in the coffee, especially coffee industry, as they had so many land around that area. And to fast forward you a little bit of this story of our family, my grandfather was very big involved in the times of the quota system. The quota system, for those who don't know, was the times where all the coffee together was sold at a certain price that was agreed on the consumption. Consuming countries versus the producing countries, they agree every 3 years on a price, and then that will be the price for coffee. So my grandfather was heavily involved in the co-ops in the region, collecting quotas, negotiating, collecting the money, and so on. So he was very heavily involved in this. He created co-ops. His kids worked with him as very young. Eventually, the only one that continued working with him was my father. All my other uncles lived in the United States, and the other one started a trout business. But my father was the only one that continued working with my father. But there was a moment where even if you were a really, really, really good coffee producer or hard worker, the situation was very tight. Once the quota system was broken, the situation was very difficult, and not many survived. They tried to do other crops. My father, for example, he started doing onions for the sweet onions. And he was exporting in a little small window that the United States had when they were not producing any onions in Georgia. So he was exporting back then on that little window, and the rest was selling locally. Then the Nicaraguans started doing the same, and Nicaragua has more land and cheaper labor. So they were able to compete in a better way than us. So then the onions were sold locally. Then when the onions were sold locally, the United States started importing onions. They were more effective and higher production. So it was getting very hard for our family's productivity in agriculture. My father was once with, and this story I heard from, so I went to this forum, executive forum, it's called, in Panama City. I gave a little bit of a story about coffee in Panama and a little bit of our family. And this guy comes up to me with this story. And then, I'm 30 plus years old. And then my father told me the story after another guy told me. A guy was heavily involved in the coffee industry and now is not because of all these things that I'm telling you. And the guy tells me that when they traveled to Washington to negotiate, the import-export situation with the onions, try to, have a more fair competition within the country. My father and what used to be the legislator on the Commission of Agricultural Products in Panama, they saw there still are in some of the Starbucks in the United States, it's a poster of something called La Mola. You can Google La Mola. La Mola is a very famous indigenous art that is from the Caribbean indigenous from Panama and Colombia. It's very famous for Panama, that type of art, indigenous art. They saw this, and they saw that says Panama, and below it says La Florentina. La Florentina used to be the top farm in Panama in the 90s. They were selling to Starbucks at a higher price than the sea market coffee price was. They were the ones that were doing a little bit better job than everybody else. The owner is an American Panamanian guy that had some connections in the United States, so he was able to sell to Starbucks.
And just for people that are listening, at this time,
we're talking about the 90s.
Geisha is not the thing.
It doesn't exist. Doesn't even exist. Okay, cool. So we're talking about the 90s. This is the 90s. The Specialty Coffee Association of Panama doesn't even exist.
And what kind of varietals are we selling to Starbucks?
Coffee was in a crisis. Yeah. Coffee was in a total crisis.
I would actually like to come back to the crisis.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about the crisis. So this story that I'm telling you now is in the middle of the crisis of coffee, and the crisis hits Panama different because, for example, once the quota system was broken, Colombia had already a strong brand that they created in the 60s, Café de Colombia. They had a lot of quantity. It was easier for buyers to focus on Colombia. Costa Rica was producing around 2 million bags of coffee a year in that times, and we were producing around 100,000 of coffee bags a year. So there was no point of going to Panama. If you have Colombia and you have Costa Rica, and why should you go to Panama? Panama was perceived as more a Caribbean type of country with the Panama Canal. People didn't even believe there was mountains. Now, if you look into Panama, there's a small region for coffee, but the varieties back then were, let's say, Típica, Caturra, Catuay, but people were not thinking about varieties back then.
And also, is there high elevation farms at this point?
There were high elevation farms, and the story of our farm that I will go a little bit farther after this, because let me go in the timeline a little bit. We're talking about 1995.
1995, okay.
1995, they already had since 1991 a Grexpan. What it was this Grexpan started for?
It was like an association.
Gremio de Exportadores.
Yeah, it was an association for the
non-conventional products.
Exporting of non-conventional products like onions, blackberries, raspberries, asparagus, which our lands are where we grow coffee. They can grow asparagus and all those.
Yeah.
So
artichokes,
they were promoting
artichokes.
So let me tell you who was promoting this.
Mm-hmm. The USAID.
It was the USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Since the coffee crisis was real bad on coffee producers in Central America,
it was a way to make up.
It was a way for them to help the coffee growers to use their land on something that was more economically feasible. Because they started promoting the export of non-traditional products like asparagus and all those.
Because remember, the United States was the reason why the quota system was broken.
Failed, right? Yeah.
The quota system was sustainable, but it didn't allow for quality to express. Farmers were thinking, we can work with these prices and we can make a profit, but you were gonna do the least possible cost. So there was not gonna be any profit, any special things to be made. You were not gonna go the extra mile
Can we go back from 1990
Yeah.
to the 70s or whenever
Yeah,
this
yeah.
quotas thing? Can you just set the lay of the land? What does Panama coffee scene look like
In the 70s.
in the 70s? Like why is the quota thing there? What is it incentivizing in terms of varietals and the cost of production? And
Okay, back then, when I was a kid,
Talking about 70s and 80s, right?
the coffee was everywhere. Coffee was the main crop in Boquete. Okay, so everybody lived off coffee, mostly everybody. So then we were kind of subsidized by the quota system, which was imposed, by the way. Okay, so we're gonna make an agreement so the coffee consumers can pay more for the producers, and we're gonna be within 115 and 145 a pound. If it goes to below 115, then we stop shipping coffee. If it's going 145, we release more coffee quota. So Panama also had a quota, and it was not sustainable. So what happens is there was a lot of pressure from the roasters that started in the United States, the specialty coffee roasters that were saying, "Hey, look, we can
need
get
better
better
coffees.
We can get better coffees, and we don't need to, just get whatever the importer brings in, subsidize. We can get better coffees and roast it and compete in the market with better coffees."
just the quota system is each country has their own amount of coffee which can
Exactly,
be exported into the
exactly.
No, but
United
let's
States.
take something into account.
right?
Exported country can only ship so much coffee.
Right.
But Panama didn't even have a boat.
And that's to stabilize the price, the average price, because the supply
Yeah.
of that is
The supply was too much.
right. If it goes too high, the price goes down.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah. So Panama didn't even have a vote. The vote from Panama was shared with the Guatemalans.
Yeah, because Panama was so
small.
little that
even
it
in
didn't
our highest
count.
years, it was too small.
So we just said, "Hey, Mexico, can you help us? Can you, to get some quotas, whatever, from the International Coffee
But of course.
Organization in London?"
To put let's put into context something. We have in Latin America, most coffee producing countries, Latin America and Africa, there's too much corruption. And then we had a dictatorship back then, and they used to keep the quotas themselves, and they resold it to the producers. So it's like all this, international organization, whatever, brings problems to countries like ours. They bring problems. We need to be a little bit. So what the Americans did hurt us at the beginning, but it was the right thing to do because it opened up for our own freedom as
Free
as
markets.
producers
Right.
to start working towards what was best for us. We tried with the onions, we tried with other products, and then we eventually found what was our right calling.
What is that calling?
No, you still want to go to the 70s, or you want me to go back to the 90s?
Well, the SCAA was founded in 1983, the Specialty Coffee Association of America, and that's where the pressure started.
And there was also the National Coffee
Association, which is not specialty.
Yeah, but kind of pushed towards that.
But what do
in
you
the
mean?
United States. In the
Why
United
did
States.
why did they put pressure?
Because Specialty Coffee
They were looking
Association
for
of
better
America,
coffees.
they say, "Wait, you know that, for example, XY coffee importer brought some good coffees from Colombia, and they say that it's from the Nariño region.
Yeah,
So
so
why
the-
don't you get more from that?" No, we can't.
Yeah.
We just have to stick to that coffee. Why don't you get more from Guatemala? I like the Guatemalan coffee. So they started saying, "Hey, this doesn't work."
They started kind of dividing
Why
the
should
coffee.
we just roast the coffee and offer the coffee that anybody brings in instead of us looking for better coffees? So
Plus, also, if you know that you're only going to be able to sell your coffee between this price and this price, there's no necessary incentive for you to create
No,
difference
no.
in any
No,
of the
of course
coffees,
not.
Right?
You
So all the
make-
coffee was
After
mixed.
this,
And
there's gonna be producing
you
the
know
same
what
stuff all the time.
things that still happen today in many countries, when you are working on a fixed price, you don't even finish drying your coffee. Why would you? It's gonna take more time and more space on your facilities. So going back to 1995, when my father walked into this Starbucks, he was kind of they were together with the politician guy, the government guy. They were kind of in a feeling of there's nothing we can do to better our economic situation with the onion thing. So they walk into this Starbucks and they see this mola.
we worked together. I worked with him, and and the guy said, we went to a Starbucks. So
Where?
in
In Washington,
Washington,
D.C.
D.C.
Okay.
So we walk into the Starbucks and the guy said, "That's my coffee, La Florentina."
That was his grandfather's coffee.
That's
His
my
grandfather's
coffee. He
farm.
says, "That's my coffee." He took pictures and everything else. I said,
And then my father said, "Wow, Panama? Not something Panama." Because you back then you were already seeing what he was saying. You were seeing a Colombia here, a Guatemala here, but not specific farm names.
So like the traceability elements sort of
And they
stuff.
see the Panama. And then my father sees La Florentina. Of course, the other guy is extremely excited because that meant his grandfather's farm is in Starbucks in Washington, D.C. That's big deal. It still is for us. Don't take us wrong. We come to the UAE and we see our names or our companies in a coffee bag and we still get excited about it. We're a little bit more used to it, but we still get excited about it. But you imagine back then, 1995, this guy comes in, and then my father comes in and sees this as an opportunity. First, he's excited because it's Panama. Second, he's excited for his colleague as well, but he saw an opportunity. He says, this is what we can do with our product. There's no special product in onions. There's no special product in berry. Panama is not very
we weren't making it on the non-traditional products.
No, the traditional products. So we're talking about Ricardo Coiner was doing non-traditional products. These other farmers they were doing too. The Tedman too.
Ricardo Coiner, they are both here.
But they were not making it. Nobody was doing something special. And then when he sees that, he's like, that's our calling. So we're talking about 1995, and then they go walking, I don't know what, like Walgreens, CVS, whatever, bought the disposable cameras that were famous back then. Take the pictures, I don't know, 20 pictures you can take from those cameras back then. Come back to the Grexpan meeting, the guild for the non-conventional products, and say, we need to do something about this. And then that's when my father started calling the other guys. And we started to do something with this. And then, because not everybody was interested in doing coffee in the guild, they decided to do a commission for specialty coffee around the guild. Now, let's go put this into context. My father is 34 years old or something like back then. And then there's Mr. Coiner, 30 years old, Mr. Hans Collins, former owner of Lerida, around 34 years old. They are young kids. And they're trying to do this. And the older generation, like my grandfather, wasn't really getting it, It was harder for them to understand. So there's this guy. This guy is a very special person for Panama and for specialty coffee as a whole. An American man, former professor from Pennsylvania, that moved for a few years into Panama and land owned by his father. He invested in this land because his father thought he was going to retire in this land in Panama, and he bought land when he was the president of United States Bank, and then eventually he never moved in. And his son, Price Peterson, calls him and says, "Dad, I want to go to Panama," because he was doing genetics for animals and plants.
The Petersons.
Okay, so
right.
Mr. Price Rachel is very young. Her brother Eric is very young as well. Daniel wasn't even born yet. Daniel was born in Panama. He moved into Panama and started doing cattle for milk. He still does that. That's his main business still. But then he started planting coffee. He's a very close friend to my grandfather. His farm is very close to our former farm. I will go back into that later. And Mr. Price Peterson, he's an American guy, a little bit more open-minded than the traditional older people, because he was about the same age as my grandfather. And then my father and the Coiner, and they come to him and say, "Hey, Mr. Price, we are thinking about doing this. What do you think about it?" And Mr. Price is like, "I think you are doing the right thing, but let's do something."
What is this?
There's specialty coffee as the specialty coffee commission for the Grexpan. He was not a member of Grexpan, so they were inviting him to become a member of Grexpan and help them build the commission for specialty coffee. He had coffee back then, not too special, but they believed it was very special back then.
And sorry, what is the commission for specialty coffee? What is the function?
The commission of specialty coffee is to create a specialty coffee commission for the guild of production that is non-conventional.
Okay.
And then Mr. Price says, "I think you are on the right path. I just have one tip. Instead of doing the commission, let's do a specialty coffee association of Panama. Forget about Grexpan. It's going nowhere." And then they did. And a few members got mad because they were not gonna do coffee. So they had to, it was dissolved and became a Specialty Coffee Association of Panama. And this is in 1995. The first trip they did, there's an event called Sinter Cafe. It's more of an educational event sponsored by the SEAA. SEAA is what used to be the America's Specialty Coffee Association. Today, for those who don't know, the SEA is a combination of what used to be the SEAE, Europe, and SEAA, America. It's a combination of both. So the SEAA is there, present, and they come here and they say a few young guys. They went to Costa Rica in a bus. I was a kid, but I remember when the bus came to pick up my father and my mother, and all their friends were there. For me, they was their friends back then, and I now, as an adult, realized they were also their colleagues, creating this association. They go into the bus into Costa Rica, San Jose, and they approach the Specialty Coffee Association of America's booth, and they say, "Hey, we're forming a new association, but we don't have any money." And they told them, "You know what? We have a convention in New Orleans coming up. We want you to join. So we'll give you a booth for free." And that's how the promotion of Specialty Coffee Association of Panama started. The other thing that they did
in 1997.
1997. So the other thing they did was, we need to do something to, stand up our coffee. What should we do? And this is the first specialty coffee cupping competition, was the Best of Panama. Now, the Best of Panama was not completely original. They learned from the Hawaiians. The Hawaiians were doing a coffee competition with an art competition. So Panama did the first art and coffee cupping competition. And voluntarily, roasters from the United States that were member of the SEAA came to cup the coffees, help the association, and also,
even the president of the SEAA came.
Was a judge, yes. So we're talking that then the first year was with art, then the second year there was no art.
This is the Best of Panama.
This is the Best of Panama beginnings.
Okay.
A few years later, the Alliance for Coffee Excellence began, and they did the Cup of Excellence. The Cup of Excellence and the Best of Panama are very similar competitions. The only reason why Panama is not part of the Cup of Excellence is because it's more expensive to be part of the Cup of Excellence than to do it ourselves. But it's fairly the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Not on the same brand, but it's the same principle. Now, the beginning of the Specialty Coffee Association of Panama would not be nothing without being able to attend the expo, and also will be nothing without the Best of Panama. The Best of Panama is the real thing that puts you in a situation that you can show you are special. And then,
as a farmer.
As a farmer.
Right.
But since 1997 until 2001, you only had bragging rights, or you had feedback from the judges if you were not doing too good in the competition. But in 2001, the Brazilians started, there was the Best of Brazil back then. Then they became Cup of Excellence Brazilian. The Brazilians began the auction system for those coffees that score well in their Best of Brazil.
Prior to this, for the Best of Panama, there was no auction?
Prior to the Best of Panama, there was no auction. The first auction is Brazil. The first cupping competition is Panama. The first auction is in Brazil, 2001. Immediately in 2001, the same year, Panama immediately says, we need to do an auction. So they started contacting, who's the guy doing this? You can continue on that if you want to.
Yeah, so when we saw the Brazilian auction, and we say, wow, that's it. We can do it. It's something we can do because it was done through the SEAA, the Specialty Coffee Association of America. They were doing everything. They were doing all the platform, all the everything. So we contacted them, and then they said, yeah, we can do your auction. So we started doing our auction, and we did very well the first year, and then we haven't stopped ever since. This year is going to be our 27th. No. So
23rd auction.
23rd auction.
It's going to be our 23rd auction.
Yeah.
27th competition.
So we did it after Brazil, and then the Cup of Excellence was not still formed. So after the Brazilian, a couple of years later, the Cup of Excellence was formed, but we had already done three
auctions.
So, and then we started doing, very well.
The first three auctions were very good.
But what does the BOP look like at this stage? You've got two different categories. You've got a natural.
No. There's no natural. There's no natural.
Coffees.
If you want, I'm looking at your questions, and I don't know if we're going to be able to catch them all. But I I think it's good to understand this timeline because it's a very interesting timeline of how things developed in Panama and how it impacted the specialty coffee world. So 2001, 2002, 2003, competition is really good. No variety is, nobody's writing about varieties. Back then, varieties were only something that were taught about agronomists. Only agronomists cared about variety because the variety depended on the type of, terroir, of the type of soil, the altitude, or the weather you had. But it was only intended for productivity. They were not thinking about the taste too much. The Best of Panama started. People were starting to cup, but they were not, thinking too much. Was this something that has to do with variety? Not really. But I want to tell you something about what happened before the Best of Panama. Going back to Mr. Price Peterson, going back to the Boquete family, and a little bit of, this is a very, this is a very hard things that passed through the times until we got to where we are now.
Let's go there straight after this question. So like when you're selecting a lot for the BOP, what are you selecting? Like if it's agronomists are thinking about varietals, but you obviously know what varietals you have, or it's all just Catuai?
No, it depends on the part of the car.
So the way we did it,
part of the farm, but it could be any varietal.
Back then we had the Boquete State Coffee. It was 1,100 meters farm.
That's what
so
I'm talking
we
about.
submitted the best clean lot, wash lot to the competition. So did my neighbor, so did the other one, so did the other one. So
Elida existed, but Elida was being replanted because it was being replaced with all the onions back to coffee. There was still lots, but smaller lots.
We didn't know anything. It was the very beginnings. We were just learning what the specialty coffee was. So we were putting any coffee in. First year, second year, we noticed that higher elevation farms were winning, like Lerida, for example.
But you didn't have higher elevation farms back then because Lerida was the first. One of the
founding members of SCAP.
Yeah, and Lerida was Mr. Hans Collins, who used to be the owner of Finca Lerida. They were doing excellent in the first years. It's because they had a high altitude farm. They had no lower altitude farm. But let me give you something to put into context. Higher elevation farms were a cost back then. Because imagine paying the cost of a picker that will pick coffee in these higher elevation farms instead of the ones that were more plain in lower elevation farms, were a little bit more productive. They produce more sherries, and you were only getting one type price of coffee because this is the quota times, So Elida for us was a little bit hard to maintain, while the other one called Boquete State Farm was way easier to maintain.
Very highly productive.
So this is what I'm trying to
4 times more per hectare.
So this is the story that I'm trying to tell right now. It's in the 1997, my family's business, my grandfather on the head, and my father was working with him, had debt, and in the debt they were in a situation that if they don't finish paying up the debt, they were gonna be in a position that the bank can repossess the farm, but they couldn't.
We were losing money every year.
They couldn't
for many
pay.
years.
They couldn't just pay the debt. There was no money to be made, so they had to sell the farm.
Sorry, what year are we in right now?
We're now in 1996, 1997, these 2 years. So there was a lot of crisis in our family. There was a lot of stress. I remember my father, my grandfather, and my uncle arguing with each other. My father already understood a little bit like, why is Lerida doing so good in Best of Panama? We had a farm next to them. But my grandfather was thinking about the productivity of the other farm. And my uncle was not really directly working in coffee, but he was always around. So he was also thinking like my grandfather. The farm in Elida was offered to famous coffee producers. I can say a name, Roberto Brenes, for example. And they were asking $105,000 for that farm. And Roberto comes and says, I give you 90. Then my grandfather says, Roberto, what about 95? I cannot do less than that. And Roberto says, no, 95 is too much. This farm is too high, too complicated to pick coffee here. So he didn't buy it for our luck. You can imagine Roberto could be the owner of Elida. He still have a great farm out today, so he could have 2 great farms. Now, my grandfather was in a situation where time was running out, and Mr. Price a great friend of him calls him and says,
Neighbor of the other farm.
yeah,
Did you
neighbor
tell
Price
of the
Peterson
farm,
from the Peterson
really,
family,
really
yeah.
good friends. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So Price calls him and says, Thatcher, I don't want you to lose your farm. I want you to be able to pay the debt. I've think about this very hard. I have no use for your farm high up, but I do have use for your farm that is the Boquete state, that is the Palmyra area, that is near their mill. And Mr. Price made an offer, and he bought that farm.
So just for people might not understand.
1997.
No, but Price Peterson has founded Hacienda Esmeralda.
He's
correct?
the founder of Hacienda
Okay.
La Esmeralda, yes.
And-
He is, something that I always say is that sometimes people, they like the underdog story, but if we didn't have somebody with money in the industry,
Yeah.
we've never got it to where we are. Mr. Price was able to buy that farm because he had money, so he saved our situation. Mr. Price also,
The farm in Palmyra.
so yeah, so we
The farm in
needed,
Palmyra, yeah.
so we moved our headquarters.
Now it's cattle.
Yeah, now it's doing cattle.
For a while, it has been cattle.
Yeah, so now that farm, because coffee is not worthy there. It's too low. So now that farm was our headquarters. So that headquarters were moved to Elida. I remember my grandfather wasn't happy. He was, he had to forcibly sell his main farm. But without knowing, we were going toward better days of this situation, But Mr. Price Peterson back then, very similar at the same time, 1997, 1996, more or less, he was offered a farm that the bank was about to repossess as well. This farm is in Jaramillo. And then he goes and sees his farm. His kids are still young. Young college years, not young, not kids, the young college years. So he goes and sees his farm, thinks about it. He had his farm in Palmyra, kind of the same altitude that's the other one. This goes that sees that farm. And then he fall in love with the place. The place is beautiful, but it was abandoned. It was high grass. The coffee trees look very bad, but they knew that farm had potential. As I said before, it's good to have somebody that has the money in the industry because that person is going to think differently and they're not going to be in the urgencies that others were. So what Price did was he bought the farm. He was probably the only one in the position to do it. And when they were going to start cleaning up that farm, what everybody would have done in his position would be planting caturra and catuay. He didn't. His son, Daniel, was young. He finished college. He had a coffee tasting course that was not too common back then. He had this open mind. He's, hey, Dad, we need to do something to see how the varieties will behave here. And then so this is a little bit of people with patience that were in a better position with an open mind, but a little bit of a serendipity as well. La Niña, the heavy rainfalls in the 1999 affected most of the coffee varieties that were in the farm. That farm was believed to have around 15 to 16 varieties because the guy that used to own it didn't know what he was doing. The guy was a drunk, so he wasn't taking care of his farm. In the same forum, I told you that the guy told me there was also the son of the guy.
Okay.
And when I was about to tell this part of the story, I was like, how do I say it? And he said, let me tell you that part of the story. Okay. And he said it. So I'm not, Yeah. And the guy loses his farm and the heavy rainfall comes. The heavy rainfalls affects most of the plants of the coffee trees. Well, let's say the caturras and catuay were standing there. They already knew about the caturra and catuay because they had it in their Palmyra farm. The other neighbors had it. They knew about this. There's this plant, different looking, and they ask around, what is this? And then the agronomist that used to take care of this farm, that was taking care again with them, Mr. Francisco Serracin, whom he rest in peace, he used to be the Ministry of Agriculture person that was the one that went to Costa Rica and brought the first seeds of geisha. Now, the geisha seeds came into Panama in different periods of time, but then when eventually they were taken down because the only purpose was to combat Roya. And people were able to fight against Roya without the necessity of having geisha coffee.
Roya is a disease.
Yeah, there's a disease for the coffee. Yeah, leaf rust. Exactly, leaf rust. And then people were like, why we will have a plant that is so difficult to produce, so little quantity, so slow to get to the full production. So there was no point. For our fortune, a guy didn't care about this, and he abandoned his farm, and there was this plant. And this family, the Petersons, realized they had resistance to the rains. And the agronomist told them, yeah, that plant, I know it very well. We brought them back in the 60s, and this plant can take rain. So you can replant in some of the heavier precipitation parts of this farm. And
Just to clarify, you're talking about the geisha right now.
We're talking about the geisha right now. This is 1999. And then in 2004, they get production enough to compete in the Best of Panama. The auction is already on. The highest price in an auction in Panama was $4.80. It was by Finca Lerida. We even got the first place, and we sold for $2.37. And that was a big deal back then. It was 4 times more than the C price.
$2.37 per pound.
Yeah, in 2002.
But the C price was 60-something cents.
Yeah, so we were happy about it. It was 4 times more. But then the Petersons started copying the coffees, and they say, I don't know if this is going to work. This is too different. People is looking for the chocolate notes in the Panamanian coffees. And then the saying was, you know what? Last year you were dead last. So you don't have anything to lose. Try it.
So the Petersons were also submitting coffee for the competition from the 1,100 meters farm next to our Boquete farm. So we're competing at the same level, and they never made it, you know.
And then they put this coffee in the.
So what altitude is this kind of?
No, we're talking about 1600s and above. This is the current Jaramillo farm owned by the Petersons, the original geisha coffee.
The OG.
The competition goes. There was already rumors because one of the instructors was in Panama a few months earlier, and he tasted it, and he's like, there's a coffee that tastes like Ethiopian in Panama. And then the rumors started coming out, and then the judges already heard about there was gonna be a coffee that tastes like Ethiopian coffee. So you can imagine this table. It's a full of Caturra Catuay, maybe a Bourbon, maybe a Typica, washed plain coffees. And there's a different coffee. So people immediately...
Floral coffee.
People immediately caught up. Wow. Scores were high. People were giving it hundreds. The hundreds were being eliminated because it was out of the curve. Everybody was crazy about this in the competition time. So everybody knew Peterson was going to win because they are the only one with a different coffee. So ceremony comes out. The Saturday ceremony comes out. First place, Peterson family with Jaramillo Especial. This is the name of the farm. Remember, the name of the lot is Jaramillo Especial, not geisha. Nobody was thinking about varieties back then. And then auction starts. To put into context, the auction of the Best of Panama is 2 months after the Best of Panama is finished. Because that allows you to prepare the lot, prepare the samples, people to submit, people to make their copyings in their facilities, with their offices. So this coffee comes into the auction and is sold for $21 a pound. You want to tell the story of what happened in that auction?
He was going to ask you something, right?
I was actually just going to ask, why are we only doing washed at this stage? Why is
because there was no naturals, and I will go into that in a few moments.
So of course, this is 2004. After 4 auctions. So
2004.
During the first 4 years of auction, so you open the online bidding. So the price will go from $1 to $101, then 10 minutes later, 105, and half an hour later, 107.
And if the coffee is really good, 110.
6 hours later, 225.
Yeah.
At the end of the auction, let's say the 4th year, 480. After 8 years auctioning, after 8 hours auctioning, 480. $4.80. So 2004. 10 minutes later, you can see the screen blank, frozen. So we call the guy who was running the auction, Malcolm, what's going on?
He's a guy in LA.
In LA, in the CAA. So what's going on with the auction? Why did it all of a sudden quit? It froze. He said, there is a hacker. I need to find out where the hacking is coming from. Somebody is hacking the auction, Wilford. So 5 minutes later, it opens up again at $10. So, and we call him again, what's going on? It opened again. He says, somebody wants this coffee. Instead of bidding 1 cent, it bid $10.
So he called the buyers to tell them, please hold. we're fixing a hacker. Don't go. And then a guy asked, what did the hacker do? He's like, well, the hacker did beat $10 in a coffee. It's like, no. I beat $10 in a coffee. I won that coffee. Yeah. So, and then it got to $21 a pound. So this is a game changer for the industry. Then the Petersons did, fast forward, they did 50 the next year. Then in 2007, they did 130. And when they did 130,
$130 per pound.
Yeah. The auction was frozen again at 99.99. And then Malcolm, who's the guy running the auction, says, I never imagined it would have gone more than two digits.
What happened this time? It's only 3 hours and the auction is frozen. Nobody can bid anymore. He says, Wilford, who in the right mind imagined that the coffee was going to go above 2 digits to 100?
And he didn't answer security person. So if imagine somebody press an extra zero, it will be a problem for them at the end. So
for context, before we move on,
Yeah.
what is the current record per pound?
the current record in the best of Panama is $10,000 a kilo. We changed to kilos.
Okay,
We recently changed to kilos.
$10,000 US per kilo.
Per kilo, yeah.
And what is the lot size of that?
The lot size for that is 55 pounds.
So
No, 50 kilos.
No, 55 pounds.
55 pounds, 25 kilos.
25 kilos.
25 kilos.
Yeah. So that was recently reduced. And recently, and I will go later into the why we reduced it and why we changed to kilograms. Now, my father and I, to put in context, we are heavily involved in Best of Panama. My father has been in the board. He was in the board for about 23 years. And then I am in the board already for my 4th year. We are both part of the committee of the Best of Panama. I'm part of the committee of the I created, and also part of the committee for the brand for Panama.
I would also like to really talk about that.
Many people tell me, focus on your company, focus on your brand, forget about the auction, forget about the association. But they don't understand my business. So for us to give our time to this industry, to this association is very valuable. For example, my father is still active. He's still working. He's still in the association. He's still in the company. But my father pushed this to be created, and then it was created, and he was one of the 3 original members. There was a 3 group, and then this 3 group became 7, and these 7 people came to the bigger companies like the Citon and the Ruiz family and say, hey, join us. We're doing specialty coffee. And they were like, no, why? And then today they all want to be part of this. We have 95 members. And, they came withoat anything. They hustled to this association. My father did, and 2 other members did with him, the Coiner and Peterson. And today, for me, my calling is, as long as I'm alive, I'm gonna take care of this.
And Hunter's father too.
And Hunter's father too. But the original 3, and then the rest of the group that formed 7.
So you've got 3 originally, then 7. Now you've got 90 plus people.
That is something.
When the association was formed, it was 7. Yeah. When the meeting started, it was 3.
Great.
And then we have today. Yeah, Hunter's father was one of the founders, but they got away for a while, and then Hunter got back to the association with the membership of the company that he works for, and now he's a member with his own coffee farm, Black Moon. And it's good to have him as a president because he's the son of one of the founders. Now, any founding member, their kids are now in taking the companies. The only 2 members that are founders and active are Ricardo Coiner and my father. To put this into context, the amount of hours we dedicate to this association a week, it's about 5 to 6 hours a week. And when it comes to the Best of Panama time, we can get up to 14 hours a week of our time. And our times are valuable. We have to work for our companies. We have to be in our families. I have a small kid, and we dedicate time to this auction, to this association. We will still going to do it until I'm not alive, until my father's not alive. And I will encourage my son to do it as well. And this association, imagine it or not, have done so many great things for this industry. There's humble people. My father is very humble in a way. He will never tell you the stories that I told you. That's why I took over the microphone, because they don't like to brag. And also Daniel Peterson, they're also very humble, and I don't even know. Sometimes I think they don't even know what they did for the industry. Talking about my father, talking about Daniel, talking about this group of guys, talking about Ricardo.
For the Panamanian coffee industry.
No, for the industry as a whole. Imagine this. When we had the 130, even though it was stopped early, $130 an auction, it was stopped early because it was 99.99, and then they finished by the phone only the top coffee, the 100 that ended up in 130. It was the La Esmeralda. But that same year you had 11.50 the second place, 7.50 the third place. The third place was ours. It was a Catuai, but normal Catuai wash for $7.50 in 2007. We can fast forward. We fast forward to the year 2013.
Before that, how does everyone else get geisha then? They get it from
the
Petersons,
that's a great story. But let me tell you just, so that was a great story. So 2013, for example, we got a Catuai for $38 a pound. So all the industry was being pulled up by the geisha coffee. And then other countries' auctions started gaining prices. When they were in the dollar and so, they started doing the $3, $4. Today you see countries around the COE getting high three-digit numbers all the time, often two-digit number. Very, very rarely you see coffee staying in one-digit number in the COE and other auctions. And the countries that have geisha, that are around 17 now, their geishas always perform really good in their COE and in their COE auctions. So if we as Panama, because yes, the Peterson discovered it in their farm, but it was the whole Specialty Coffee Association of Panama movement, the whole Best of Panama movement,
competition, the organization,
opened up the idea. If this did not happen, today the industry would have been a lot less advanced. And now remember, we think about varieties. One of your questions is about if we were going to plant another varieties. Nobody spoke about varieties before geisha was put on the map for the specialty coffee industry. Nobody in a buying and producing side spoke about varieties. Only people that spoke about varieties were the agronomists. And I want to go into the naturals. Because you asked us why only washed? Why only washed? Because there was no naturals back then. The natural coffee is another thing that started booming in Panama. Because it didn't start in Panama. The geisha is not originally from Panama. The geisha is from Ethiopia. It got from Ethiopia in the 30s, got into Costa Rica in the 50s, got into Panama in the 60s, but nobody thought about buying geisha coffee as a beverage until 2004. So the other thing is natural coffees. Natural coffees is something that was done in farms that had no resources to buy machinery. That depulps the coffee and washes after that. So they have no other choice to dry the coffee with the whole sherry. And also like the pasillas in Colombia were dried that way, stuff like that. This guy goes into Ethiopia. He's a coffee buyer back then. Joseph Brodsky, he's a coffee buyer. He goes into Ethiopia and he traveled with Graciano Cruz. And they were like, seeing these places, remote places. And they say, I think these coffees can perform well in Panama.
Joseph Brodsky.
Joseph and Graciano were traveling around. They say, hey, what about these coffees? They can perform really well in Panama. Maybe we can try it because we see there's potential, even though these people doesn't have any resources to do better coffees. But Ethiopian coffee is great. So you even doing it pretty well, you can have a nice tasting coffee. So they come back to Panama and they call.
What year is this?
This is 2006.
Okay.
They regroup a few farmers that had great relationship with Joseph. My father is one of them.
And remember, back then, we were already very much into coffee. The geisha, we were planting geisha, trying different elevations and cupping and roasting and cupping and roasting and cupping. And so Joseph said, Panama is the perfect place to do this.
Because he already had relationship with the Panamanians. He was not a farmer back then.
The farmers are aimed for quality now.
And you can ask them So he comes here and there was no governmental regulation. That's still happening in many countries. And by not having governmental regulations, you can be a little bit more innovative. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that we were lucky to have as a country.
Like they used to have regulations. You couldn't do naturals in Kenya, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. And then what happens then is Joseph takes a group of farmers And I can give you a name of few. You know Rafa Mar from Bambito. It's Priscilla's brother. Then you have the Hartmans. And then you have the former owners, the Collins, the former owners of Lerida, and my father, and a few others. And they start producing... Garrido. They start producing the natural coffees. And the natural coffees experiment. Joseph, there's a document that my grandfather signed with Joseph. The agreement was that Joseph's company, today is his father and brother's company, was going to buy the coffee that they produce. But the experiment was supposed to be a failure. So Joseph did not buy the coffee. And people say, you know what? There's no point of doing this again. We tried it. Fine, let's go. So my father tells this guy we used to work with a lot of coffee brokers. Take a sample of this. Try to see what happens. If you can sell it, sell it. If you cannot sell it, it's fine.
When you say it was a failure, what do you mean?
Because the taste was not what he expected to.
Okay.
So he sent it to the United States, and he was in a cupping table, and this guy, Colby Bar, in a cupping table, tasted it, and he says, wow, this coffee is special. And then the guy calls my father, hey, there's a guy here in California that likes your coffee a lot. He says he's gonna visit Costa Rica, so he might visit you too. And then parallel to that, two other guys, Jeff Taylor from PT's Coffee and Bird Rock Coffee today.
Colby Bar is from Verve.
Colby Bar is from Verve Coffee. And then Colby Bar, Verve Coffee is still our client. And the other, PT is not anymore, but we still have a friendship with him. And the other guy was Mike Perry from Clutch Coffee, who's still our client and really good friends. And they say, yeah, we think this coffee can work. And in 2007 was the first time the natural coffees from Panama were exported by my father. Graciano was doing a lot of naturals and honeys. How many years later? 1 year later, 2 years later?
Uh-huh.
And
2
then
years later.
Not many people were doing it, but some people were trying it. But there was no opening in the competition. Now, this is something that I want to send as a message. And also as part of the story. Back then, we did what the Americans told us to do. Period. Americans and Europeans. We did what they told us to do. You do not do natural coffees. This is only a washed coffee country. Washed coffee is pure. Natural coffees are not pure. Don't do washed coffee. And then a few members in the association heard and they say, oh, we don't know, we cannot do what they don't want us to do. They are our buyers, they are our judges. We need to do what they ask. And there was a little bit more of a rebellion, innovative minds, you know? And there's a year, 2009. The competition is being held. All the washed coffees, everybody finished cupping. And then Graciano and my father planned to do a cupping table after the cupping table and say, hey, this is volunteer. You can taste the coffee as you want. You don't have to taste it. This is not part of the competition. Just taste them. It was honeys and natural from my father's farm and Graciano's farm. They organized this cupping table, and some people criticized it. Many people loved it. And some farmers were even saying, you're ruining this industry.
All right.
You know, colleagues, you know, one thing that you have to understand, we get arguments, heat up all the time. But that's the only reason why we have grown so much. We have screamed into each other in the meetings in ways that, you know, it's not healthy. But at the end, we all bury the hatchet after the meeting. We don't take it personally. And we grow as an industry because of this. And the involvement people have in this association, the same way we are as involved, Rachel Peterson is as involved in this association, like heavily passionate involved. Her brother Daniel is also involved. And we argue all the time. But at the end of the day, when there's an argument, as I tell my father, remember, when you argue with Rachel, both of you are aiming the same goal. Both of you want the best for the association. But maybe you don't see it the same way. But then the natural coffees are placed in this table. People start hearing about them. Then there's a little bit of the market around the naturals. More people from the group of the Best of Panama. There's a wider varied group. Europeans, American, few Asians back then, not many as today, started tasting the natural coffees. It was not until 2011 that the natural coffees were offered into the best of Panama. And then it's opened up for 2 categories. Because of course you cannot put them in the same category. That's something that the COE has not understood yet. They should. And then the natural coffees were perceived better than the washed coffees. Right. Immediately year 1, 2011. 2006, they started with the experiments. 2007 was the first export. 2011 was the first time it was placed in the best of Panama. Once it's placed in the best of Panama, goes into an auction gets attention, immediately opens up the market's eyes. First coffee that was not, that coffee was not the Esmeralda coffee back then. It was a farm called Don Pachi with the original guy that brought the seeds in the 60s into Panama. Got sold for $1,100
a pound.
No, $111 a pound. And the Esmeralda coffee was sold at $75. That was the winner of the wash category. And that's when people realized, wow, natural coffees must be something. In 2013, the Esmeralda people broke a record for $350 per pound with their natural coffee.
Right. And so this is 2011.
In 2013. So 2 years later, they broke the record again that they already previously had.
With the natural.
With the natural this time.
Right.
So since then, naturals were the mostly acclaimed coffees. And I can fast forward in the auction. I can fast forward to today. This 2023 auction is the more recent one. The wash coffee was the one that was sold at a higher price. But since 2011 to 2023, more times the natural coffee has been sold higher than the wash coffees. So then people started working more towards natural coffees outside of Panama. And this is something else that brought the industry. You know, I'll go to a coffee shop and you ask, what countries do you have? What varieties do you have? And what processes do you have? And it, depending on your mood or your preference, you will order according to, in between the 3 options. Now,
are you hinting there that the progression of the BOP and people starting to understand varietal from geisha winning has kind of elevated or fast tracked this idea of us understanding or wanting to understand like the transparency of everything about that coffee, like in terms of varietal, terroir, the farm, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, first thing is geisha variety brought the name and the recognition and the labeling for varieties. Then the processes, the processes started. The Costa Ricans started doing the honeys, and the honeys are very famous too. But the naturals were the ones that, because one thing is, you come through to the farm, cup the coffee, take it, sell it. Your clients will see it. That's it. But when you do Best of Panama, you open up to a bunch of judges that are mostly buyers, and then after the bunch of judges, it will be 100 or more potential clients that submit into the Best of Panama and get samples. And then after them, you'll spread it out. You'll send it to Japan, to the UAE, to the United States. And then their clients start reading about it. And then the competitors start saying, oh, look, they brought some coffee from Panama that is this process and this variety. Next year we go to Panama, we visit that guy. They visit, and they maybe not buy that one, but they buy something similar from another farmer. And that opens up a little bit more than if it is a direct sale. And then other producers from other countries see what's happening and they say, let's try to copy the good things.
Right.
And this industry is all about copying each other. We copied some, others copied us, and at the end, it's for the better of the industry. And you had the question that I don't want to skip about how everybody got geisha in 2004.
Get their geisha, yeah.
How everybody got what?
Geisha seeds.
How do they get their geisha seeds?
Okay, so geisha seeds. That's a very good question. So comes the 2004 geisha, Saturday evening, pricing ceremony, the winner, La Esmeralda Special. So what, Daniel, what variety is that? That's a geisha. Geisha. So I went around to my other colleagues that were in the dinner. I said, you know what geisha is? Yeah, I have some. One of those guys said, yeah, I have some in my farm. I have geisha in my farm. Yeah, the trees are different. They look like this.
Some others discovered it after that.
So I said, I need to get some seeds. And everybody did the same thing I did. So that was on Saturday. On Monday, I already bought a bunch of seeds. I did my nurseries. A lot of people did the same thing. And we were planting geisha from 1,000 meters all the way to whatever we had land. We, in our case, 1,800 meters, 1,700 meters, and some other people were, a lot of farmers were planting at 1,000 meters geisha all over Boquete. And then,
but people were finding seeds wherever they can.
Whatever.
Because the people had some, but they had limited quantity, and they were already in high demand because
one pound of seed is 1,000 trees. Okay, so you get 1 pound here, and so year after year, everybody was planting geisha, but 5 years later, you find out that at 1,000 meters
doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's a good coffee, but it's not geisha cupping. 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 meters. Then you know that you have to be about 1,400 meters. But so for a few years, people or bought seeds or waited for the next harvest and bought seed from that guy instead of that guy selling the coffee as green, or they planted and then 3 years later they will harvest the seeds from the trees and replant. So that's how seeds started become available around Panama.
And during this period of time, the Best of Panama had only Esmeralda had geisha. So they were winning every single year. Of course, the geisha is better than every other coffee in the cupping format. Doesn't have to be the preference for everybody, but in the cupping format, it will be easier to win, to beat other coffees, especially back then. In 2001, in 2011, 2004 to 2011. In 2011 is the first time somebody else had a geisha coffee in the competition. So from 2004 to 2011, they were the only ones that were able to compete 7 years with geisha coffee. In 2011, another one. By 2013, there were already a few more. And this is a year that I always like to mention because this year the Esmeralda got $350 a pound, but at the same time, you got Roberto Brenes, Graciano Cruz, and Ricardo Coiner getting over $100 a pound. So other farmers getting more than one farmer was getting over $100 a pound. And for example, our Catuai that year got $38 a pound. That was, mind-blowing. And then that auction was the last auction that was during Panama's office hours. Then we switched into nighttime to make it easier for the Asians. And I remember we were sitting in somebody's office, another coffee producer's office. He was a newbie, so he was very happy to get around, I think it was around $80 a pound. Ricardo was sitting in the same office with us, and he was so happy he was getting around $170 a pound. And we were very happy to get $38 a pound. We had already geisha planted.
We didn't have any geisha.
We had planted.
Submitted.
Yeah, not submitted. We had geisha planted in our farm. We sold a little bit of quantity to Birth Coffee and to Maruyama Coffee, but we didn't have enough to compete in the Best of Panama. But we were very happy with what was happening to us, and we knowing that our geisha production was about to come, we were happy that what was happening was eventually going to be something that will benefit us. In that, actually, the next year is the first time we competed with geisha coffee was 2014. So we have 9 years competing with geisha coffee. Since then, we've been pretty successful. We've scored a bunch of top 3 places, a bunch of first places, a bunch of second places. And every year we have our geishas in the auction. Now, before that, from 2004 to 2011, from 2004 to 2014, for 10 years, our Catuai was competing and was hitting hard. But sometimes it was not able to beat the geishas. There's a year that of course, you had the geisha in the top, when there was only one geisha, then you divided the categories. And there was one competition that was geisha, only washed, traditional varieties, only washed, but there was so little quantity of geisha coffee in the natural category that you have to compete with the natural coffees in that competition. So we ended up with a 5th place, but it was the number 1 out of the non-geishas. The other top 4 were geishas. And that happened to us a few times and happened to others also. So let's say it's not unfair. It's what was going on back then. So that's why we ended up dividing into categories. We ended up dividing into 5 categories at one point. But we realized that we have, it's part of the process. We grew, we opened up to 5 categories and realizing that 5 is too many. And now we are back into 3. 2 geishas and 1 traditional. I I think today the market is more open to either washed or natural, depending on which one was better. It's not that they are aiming for a variety, for a process specifically, but all these things have been part of the growth.
If we take a look at, you said something interesting just then, that the geisha doesn't really perform if it's below 1,400 meters. Why is that? What?
Because
It's a delicate flavor.
yeah, because you know what,
Acidity.
the most important in Panama and everywhere else for the quality of a coffee is elevation. The second most important one is elevation, and the third one is elevation. If there is a fourth one, is elevation.
No, it depends also because if
It depends.
If you
but
have
I
like
mean,
a
if you
moquita or
if you have
Paranema,
for geisha,
it doesn't
for
perform
geisha,
at-
and for many other varieties,
but not all.
there are some exceptions, of course. Okay, and most of the coffees, 99% of the coffees that you buy or you source, elevation is number one. Okay, so
Probably this was about
then
2000.
we see the second thing is, you know, what they call in French.
Elevation?
No,
Terroir.
the terroir. So in the terroir, you have to have the microclimates. You have to have, like in the geisha case, the forest around the geisha, where it comes from Ethiopia. It's a wild tree. It comes to Panama around wild mountains. So it benefits from a beneficial microorganism, natural yeast, bacteria that benefit the quality of the coffee. Then you have also in Panama volcanic soils. So you have all these factors combined. And if you, a lot of people understand the wine. So if you take a Grand Cru in France, we are like in the Grand Cru region with the special variety. Once you start going down in elevation, you start losing what I consider the main factor, elevation. So the delicate flavors will not develop because once the ripening is much faster, so at say 1,800 meters, once the coffee flowers, once the geisha tree flowers, until you harvest it, it will take 8-9 months. If you are at 1,100 meters, downtown Boquete, it will take 6 months. So it's the development of the seed, the intrinsic flavors of the seeds will develop very fast, and the delicate flavors will not have a chance to develop. You know, all the floras, the deep flowers, the lemongrasses, the other like the tiny, sweet, delicate flavors would not develop that fast. They need cold weather because the elevation is cold, colder weather to develop. So that is why the elevation is a very important factor as far as geisha in this case, and many other varieties too. Catuai too, and all that.
And that same description before copying and thinking about the flavors of coffee was also the reason why there was not much interest in doing production in high elevation farms, because it takes longer and it's harder.
And it's much longer, produces less.
But no. If you ask Catuai also performs better in high altitudes.
And Catura and Típica. In my case, in Panama, I haven't tried a Makita from 1900 versus on the same table 1500. I have not tried it, so I cannot tell you.
Well, because like one of my questions was, I think the land is so valuable, like farmland is so valuable. Why would you produce anything other than geisha? And I think you just answered that. And that if you have any land below, let's say 1400,
I think but I think that
you would need to produce something else.
No,
because geisha.
Actually, we don't have anything below 1550. 1550 is the lowest we have in El Burro.
Okay.
So
why allocate
you know
funds?
something, sometimes business wise it's a little bit difficult to not have anything lower, but we had a discussion, my father and I, a few years ago, that he wanted to produce only geisha coffee. Now, let's remember something very important. Geisha coffee will take 2 times longer to reach full production, and it's 4 times less productive than Catuai coffee. And geisha coffee trees, we have been able, with the agronomist, with time, we have been able to achieve a better result. But from nursery to farming, you get more dead trees than you get with Catuai variety. But I can tell you something that it's the reason why we continue doing Catuai coffee, is because it has to do a little bit with brand. Here in the UAE, you have people that think about luxury and think about high quality and think about paying for the biggest thing. So buyers from the UAE will be very comfortable with coming to Panama, with coming to Lamastus Family Estates, and say, okay, I want to buy only geisha from your production. I don't care. But in other countries like the United States, for example, that is kind of a like the one that pushed everything. They do it differently. They will buy, let's say, 10 bags of Catuai and 1 bag of geisha. So their geisha, bless you, the geisha will do it. They will do it as a, the main, launching that we have from these farmers from Panama and Wilford Lamastus and our relationship with him. And we will sell this coffee for, let's say, $65 for 100 grams. And then they'll say, okay, and then we have this for $22 for 12 ounces. And that will be our Catuai. And then that's how they see their sales. Volume. That's how they see the sales. And that's how we can, get to brands easier.
Just
for
to
example,
be able to offer that lower price Catuai.
Yes, exactly. So we have, for example, a customer in or many customers actually in Asia. We reached them via Catuai. Eventually they became geisha buyers. And this is a way to be able to, grow our brand better. And at the same time, we do have a margin and we do have
and we do have a responsibility.
we do keep making money out of this, but it's not
like Clash Coffee, Verve Coffee. They have been buying from us Catuai 5-7 years before we had geisha.
Yes,
and they have never stopped. And we have clients, a lot of clients like that.
But what are like in terms of all of your crop? What is the percentage of processes that you allocate?
the process or varieties?
Process.
No.
To the Catuai.
Oh.
Of the Catuai.
No.
What is washed? What is natural?
Well, we have around. It's getting. We're working. We're actually working on something around that.
He's talking about Catuai.
Yeah.
Catuai is natural. Mainly.
Yeah. But we did some honeys and washed lately in last scrub. Well, we were not doing a few years back. We were almost to 90%.
And is your Catuai at, like, let's say you're selling it at the best price possible?
Let's say we are 80% natural in the Catuai.
Okay, let me explain something.
Profit margin.
I'm going to explain something interesting to you and important for you.
No, but
for your
let's
audience
answer the question first.
It will answer the question.
Okay.
It's very important for your audience to understand this. To process natural coffees is more demanding. You need 4 times the infrastructure of everything because you need to dry the pulp, the mucilage. Well, in the wash, you only dry the seed with the parchment. So you need more room, more area to dry, more packs, more time, more cars, more
everything,
more storage. So that's why not that many people produce natural. I think that we're in Panama, we're the highest natural coffee producer of Panama. Catuai, even geisha, I think. Catuai, natural producer of Panama, we're the largest. We have a huge infrastructure drying coffee. We have 100 beds. We have in another farm, which is, we bought it specifically to dry coffee. We call it Caldera Drying Operation. We have trucks going back and forth. We have machines to dry Catuai natural. So our Catuai sells very, very easily. And it's not expensive. It's $7 a pound. Okay? It can be afforded by anybody. We have clients in Japan, Taiwan,
it's a great coffee.
China.
It's a great value. It's a great value.
It's a very good coffee too. So anyway,
now if you put me a geisha versus the Catuai every morning, I will prefer the geisha, of course.
If you want to buy a very good natural, I know it because I have buyers that go like you to Colombia, Central America. And I said, well, I have this washed coffee here that I can sell it to you, Catuai. And then they will say, yeah, but I can get that Colombia for $1.80 a pound. But you cannot get the natural in Colombia or anywhere else with this quality for that it's not available.
Into the traditional range, the traditional variety
Now,
range.
the geisha is a different thing. Everything has changed. Let's talk about the geisha. Forget about Catuai. Everything has changed.
No, but the important thing about the Catuai is that Catuai is still
our driver,
a profitable product. And it also lets us, not all the markets have the same ability to sell. And some markets, it's the best introduction to start. You introduce with the Catuai and eventually it will grow into geisha.
Exactly.
Okay.
A lot of people do not have our Catuais. So, but the geisha, the processes of the geisha, very interesting. 6 years ago or so, we started producing geisha natural. Then we started doing the anaerobic. Then we invested in, first we started doing it in plastic tanks, unexpensive ones, fermenting coffee there. Good results, still, they are good. Then we started investing in the reactors, fermenters, stainless steel, very sophisticated technology with everything to measure everything from pH to whatever temperature. And then we invested in what we call the anaerobic slow dry vault underground, control temperature. And then that was 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we noticed that people were changing not to that processing coffees, let's say, not to the 10 days anaerobically processed, but maybe 4 days, 6 days, 3 days anaerobically processed.
People are demanding less
process
in the cup.
But still some,
a lot of pump of fruit.
Yeah. So people still like the processing ones, but not as much as before.
Or not that everybody was going towards one direction. Now it's a little bit more spread. It's now more about preferences, personal preferences, than a trend.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. The trend was coming. Everybody was going, wow, everybody wants anaerobically processed. Then started going down.
That's something that shows you that the consumption has matured. Right. It's like wines. You have some preference. I'll have some preferences. They can both still be great wines. I think that people that were following the specialty coffee trends is so young. It's so young for us as this part of this industry and the ones that consume our coffees, that people were following the trends, but it's now coming into a mature way that now people is going into their personal preferences. And then before you used to think everybody in a specific market likes only one type of coffees. But now you have in a specific markets, some markets are more advanced than others, but now you have in a specific market the people that will only drink the washed, or the people that will prefer the honey, or the people that will prefer the heavily fermented, or the people that will prefer the cleaner processy ones, or the people that will like them all. So now you have to work around everything, and that's what we are trying to do with the geishas.
And we have done a couple of surveys to see what this year, what our clients want now, because we have to process the coffee right as soon as we receive the sherry. So what do we do with it? Do we do 60% naturals or 70% naturals and processing coffees, or do we do less processing coffees? So we did a survey. Also by me talking to my clients for the past 2 years and coping with me and everything else, I realized that they say, well, you know what, I'm more, the processing, I don't want it anymore this year. I want more clean naturals.
We were abandoning those. We were kind of abandoning those. We were doing very little of the clean naturals. And last year, we started coming out with more clean naturals. You know what? This is a funny story. One of my baristas, he's a very good barista in Panama. He is, he knows about coffee, but he's very young. He's only 21 years old. He couldn't understand how a natural coffee would have tasted so clean, because he grew up into his coffee knowledge grew up into the anaerobic versus washed.
Right.
And he didn't know there was a middle flavor.
So a lot of people are going toward the clean naturals and washed.
So people want washed and clean naturals now.
Not that they want that and not the rest. Now the market is more spread out.
Right, okay, got it.
It's spread out. But one thing for sure is that the processing ones from Elida, they don't want the processed one because they know that from Elida and from El Burro too, they can get, if they get, I'm gonna give you an extreme. Let's say that I do the same geisha from 1900 meters wash and 20 days anaerobically processed. I will ruin all the flavors. Mm-hmm. If I do it 10,
you will not ruin it. You will mask the florals.
I can put a catuai, and it will be very difficult for you to tell if it is a catuai or a geisha at 20 days.
According to what he's saying, I want to clarify something.
Well, 20 days is 20 days.
Yeah, but clarify something. In the burro, there will be more demand for processing. In Elida, it will be more demand for cleaners. Right. If we want to talk about our own product.
Well, the survey. We have to watch the survey.
Yeah, but when people cup, El Burro can get a little bit more days in the fermenters than Elida. Elida will be a little bit less, but you can still work with fermented coffee from Elida that will be performing really well, and then will have a demand. But more often we're seeing people asking, we want to wash the Elidas. Mm-hmm. We want to wash Elidas and we want to wash Elidas.
Or and no also, more than 3-6 days.
And we have performed really well in the Best of Panama with washed Elidas. Now, something that we were not doing for a little while was the honeys. And the honeys are performing really well. Are performing really well when it comes to the buying process. Now, the honeys are very difficult when it comes to the Best of Panama because it's risky. Because if you put a honey into the Best of Panama, it's supposed to be in the non-pulp category, which is the one we call washed. But if it brings too many fruits, it can be removed. Out, right? So we wouldn't compete with the honeys, but the honeys in the market, people are getting more demand from that. So it's something that it has become a challenge because now we have to see, play around what's the people gonna like. Now, the market changes year by year so fast, and the biggest problem of all is that the buyers, you, for example, will not be the last one to say what coffees are going to be liked. It's going to be the guy or the girl that comes into a coffee shop and orders the coffee. Right. And it's very difficult to get the information from them so immediate. So it's something that we have to be opening our eyes every year to see what is the people preferring.
Got it. No, I'm aware of your time. There is a couple of questions I just want to...
It's fine. Right? I'm worried about your time.
No.
I don't know if people is going to be still tuning in at this point.
I think people are still here. So in terms of like coffee production, a lot of sort of Central and South American countries have issues with labor force migration. Like they're finding it hard to get pickers to actually during harvest. Do you also face
I will ask that question.
Yeah, you have to answer that question.
So I need to sell my coffee at a good price for me to be able to do what I do, what I have been doing for the past years. I pay well, very well. I have school for the kids, a program. I have very good, very good.
Let me explain what the school means. I am
very proud of the.
Let me explain what the school means because it's not like a full program school. The harvest season in Panama happens mostly during summer vacations in Panama, and we built into our facility a school that is for all ages, from 2 years old to 16 years old, and the kids have different activities that have to do with games, sports. Some do reinforcement into what, for example, there are kids that lack mathematics. The professor's gonna help them with mathematics for next year, with Spanish, and so
breakfast, lunch.
Breakfast, lunch is a program, but this program was built because there is a huge problem in all of our countries into child labor, and we're still getting a lot of bad rep, the coffee industry, for the child labor, but Panama is the one that is doing, well, I don't want to talk about other countries, but we, not only us, our community is doing a lot to change this. The school was built for this. Why? Because if I tell you as a parent, you're gonna tell me, I want to bring my kid to pick coffee with me because I don't want to leave him alone. I cannot leave him alone, and at the same time, it's gonna be better for me if he helps me. We tell you, your kid doesn't have to have the same future as you. Your kid can be something else. We want to help. We have this program where they can even learn English. There's professors that we hired, and there's also volunteer work that they hear about this and they say, hey, we want to help. How can we help? And they come and help with different activities. And then all this is built for the idea of not getting child labor. Now, we have associations that do this. No, ¿cómo se dice fundaciones?
Foundations.
In Panama.
So we have a contract with a foundation,
One
a
called
big
Casa Esperanza,
foundation that
but
gets
they
money
are,
from abroad.
They are topped. They cannot receive more kids.
Gotcha.
So the farmers that have the ability to do it, because we have probably a stable economy as a company, we can take kids away from them and be in charge of us, because it's not only kids from our farm, it's also kids that work, their parents work in neighbor farms. The farmers like us, farmers like Esmeralda, we try to take all the weight away from this foundation, so they can take care of the kids that are in farms that are not doing as well as we are.
So of course we have the summer school program for the kids. Then I feel very proud of the living quarters where they live. They are very, very, very world-class living quarters. You have to understand, maybe your audience doesn't understand very well where Panama is. Panama still a developing country, very poor areas. The people who pick coffee for us are poor, like the Central Americans, maybe not as bad. But we have very good... we have very good quarters where they live, with running toilets like yours here, showers, everything else, solar powers, biodigester, what they throw trash there. We produce organic fertilizer. We have 3 of them. Gas for them to cook. So everything for where they live is world class. I feel very proud. You can go everywhere in the world and go 2 hours and you say, wow, top class. I'm very, very proud, and I can say it out loud. Second, I pay very well
for
my pickers.
All these things that he mentioned is not too common in the rural areas of Panama. It's very sad that there's a situation, but all the things that he mentioned are sometimes
I can do it
for
because
many people.
But I can do it because I get paid well for my coffee. So second thing, I pay my employees very well. So this is the example that I always give when they ask me this question. So in Boquete where we come from, we have many restaurants, tourism industry. The restaurants pay, they have the cooks, the waiters, and all that stuff. They get paid very well. I can take away any of those waiters to work for me because I pay them very well, because I have all these advantages for them. So having said that, in my case, on my situation, I do not have any labor shortage issues.
Okay.
But there is labor shortage in Panama.
Panama as a
Panama as a country.
You know what's our biggest competitor in labor? Costa Rica is. You know why? Because when you go to Costa Rica, Panama, if you go to Panama, Panama has great things that will be better than Costa Rica, but Costa Rica has many things that are better than Panama. Education is one of them.
Right.
Health is another one of them, especially in the rural areas. So if they cross the border to Costa Rica, first of all, the Costa Ricans, as a government, are more open-minded than our government. And then their government will give them work permits. And then they will be able to be in the health system of Costa Rica, which is way better than Panama's. And I know they are their faults, but it's better than Panama's, especially in the rural areas. And then if they go to school, their kids go to school in Costa Rica, they will have a better education than they will have in Panama. The Costa Ricans take away the novice from many farmers of Panama. And it is a situation that that's our migration situation. We don't have too much. Yeah, that's our migration situation. I'm pretty sure that
we don't have anybody going to the U.S.
Exactly. Not from Panama, it's not going to the U.S. But no, I remember when we spoke about the podcast for the first time, there was something we were planning on talking about. It was about all the riots that happened in Panama, the closing of the street.
But before we get to that, though, I think one of the things as well, though, is from a green bias perspective, if these countries, the better let's say the economy and the better the social services for the worker class or for anyone in that society, the more expensive that coffee becomes because you're inputs, right? Yeah. And so it's actually a relative disadvantage to a country to have that in there. Yeah, because unless you have the branding that Panama does, right?
Costa Rica is I think in Latin America, you can go in the Latin American producing countries, because Uruguay can be better, but Uruguay doesn't produce any coffee. Costa Rica is the number one in that case.
Yeah, it's better off socially.
Panama is not good.
But Costa
Ricans don't move to the U.S. in mass like the Hondurans or the Salvadorans, Guatemalans.
Costa Rica is very
Nicaragua.
different than the rest of Latin America.
So they don't face that labor force migration
They
thing,
don't
but
face
from
Actually, they are able. They have demand for work because the
They bring
Panamanians
people from Nicaragua or
and Panama.
our novices from Panama. just
Depending
for a
on
while.
where the
our
farms
novices go
are.
back to Panama.
the novices come temporarily and they go back to their reservations where they are originally from, and in Nicaragua they want to migrate. I think they have 1 million Nicaraguans in Costa Rica.
Costa Rican have a lot of labor from Nicaragua for picking coffee.
So before I'd love to hear what's next for you guys, and then what's
let's
next.
say something quickly about this. When you talk about that you spoke to me about about the.
But there's two things I also want to talk about.
Oh, you
that.
want to talk about that at the end?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
but
okay.
I want to talk about those riots, about the thing. I also want to talk about the branding of Panamagation.
Because I wanted to connect that. No, let's talk about this now because it's kind of the sad story.
Before the branding of Panama Geisha, when he said that, Oscar, every year, if you have to be known every year you have to do something better than the year before. So we were talking about the processing. We invested a lot of money in processing. We did our vaults like underground. Yeah, we did.
But that's not branding. That's the question that he's
No, I know. But look, so we have the now this year we're focusing on the drying of coffee. Drying of coffee, I always tell people, is even more important than processing. In drying coffee, you can ruin coffee. You can ruin it. You can
no matter the process.
no matter the process. You can put real thick layers of coffee and don't rake it in the beds ever, and then you will have off flavors, the flavors that you didn't desire. Now we have invested in our new, very nice, high-tech, very controlled dark room drying. We did test last year. Now we did a big room this year with fans, very all seal, the proper racking, the air flows with the same humidity, 2 dehumidifiers. So we are doing, improvement this year on our drying process. The drying process, people ignore it sometimes. It's very, very, very important if you want to continue having your top quality coffee always sought after in the market. So if you have top quality coffee sought after in the market, then it's easier to work on your branding. I let you talk about the branding now.
I was gonna talk first about the riots because it was connected to the labor.
But is this going to be like, so you used to do Elita ASD, Loma or ASD, whatever. Is this going to be like an ASD with an extra bit for the slow
DR.
Well, it could be one because
It's DR.
choices.
Gotcha.
Dark room drying, bed drying, patio drying, or exposed bed drying, whatever, different drying process.
Man, we have to do another podcast because it's like, when I come to Panama, I kind of want to talk about like exactly what you're doing, like the farm dynamics.
Actually,
but anyway,
we can do one in Panama.
Yeah.
Now, quickly, because I was going to finish the part of the labor because this connects to the majority of the people that blocked the roads in Panama were from the Nove reservation, who is the same people that work in our farms.
just could you just quickly update the listener as to what the issue was?
Because in Panama we had heavy riots that closed the roads for several weeks and didn't allow any fuel to come into the highlands, and it didn't allow any products that were produced, fruits, vegetables, coffee, and others, to come into the Panama City. So there was like within our own country we were blocked, and we were blocked because there was riots that were closing the roads and didn't allow any truck in and out, and there was ways to do it by plane, but it was a complete disaster. And the majority of the people that did this were from the Nove region. And the Noves are the same ones that work in our coffee farms. No single coffee worker in the Lamastus Family Estates joined the riots because they have better conditions. Now, the reality is that the majority of them, not our workers, but the majority of the Noves are not in really good conditions. That's what creates these commotions. And that's what happens with this. Now, I just wanted to add that because that was one of the conversations we had, and it's the second time it happens in 2 years, and it's something that we need to take care of. And at least us as citizens of Panama, us as producers, employers, I think we are doing our part, but we can use this platform and other platforms to motivate others to help do their part, because the only way we're gonna get this is to, work for better situation for the people. That the government is not gonna do it anytime soon. Hopefully they do it. Hopefully we get a new government soon and we start thinking about them. But it's not happening anytime soon. So this is the way we support the situation.
Hold on. And why do we support it? Bro, we have been growing coffee in the same farms for 105 years.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Who
but
better than us to
Yes.
do this?
No, and remember something. It's not because we are the kindest guys in the world. It's because you guys pay good for
Yeah,
our
of course.
coffee
If we didn't
that
get enough
allow us
money-
to reinvest
Right.
in the people, in the facility, and in the land.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have, every time you pay for our coffee, every time you pay the invoice, you are allowing money to flow into the company that of course will benefit our lifestyles, but also benefit the facility, the land, which is very important, the land, the soil, the nature, and the people. Because these three things are the ones that make our coffee great. Now, branding.
Yeah, just to like so Colombia as a origin has great branding for coffee, but Panama in terms of Panama Geisha has its own brand. You even have your own logo, correct, for Panama Geisha. So can you explain like what was the
Remember,
history?
Panama produces or exported last year 30,060 kilo bags. 30,060 kilo bags. Colombia
30,000
exported
bags.
30,000 bucks of coffee.
That's it.
30,000. Colombia exported 13 million.
No, 16 million last year.
16 million? 16 million. Costa Rica, like 2 million. Nicaragua, 2.7 million. Honduras,
8 million.
8 million. Panama, 30,000. So we're very
Ethiopia,
small.
5 million.
Ethiopia, 6 million, 5 million. So we're very small. But that's why we are always working on things that will make us better, That's why the World Coffee Panama is going to be held in Panama in 2016 and not in Costa Rica or
26.
Guatemala or Mexico or Brazil or Colombia, in Panama. Okay? In Panama. Panama produces 30,000 bags.
Now,
So-
remember something. The branding in Panama, so the branding, Panama Geisha branding began in late 2017. We began working on it. I think Panama Geisha brand is still in the works. No, I don't think it's still in the works because I am part of that commission. Panama Geisha brand is the idea of showing us as a collective. Because at the end of the day, let's put it into the wine perspective. I'm not a wine connoisseur. I know best wines of the world come from France, and I know other great origins for wine. I don't know the name of the best wine Grand Cru or wine producer in the world. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that it comes from France. Now, we, as Lamastus family, can aim so far. Alone, the Lamastus or the Petersons or others cannot reach so far unless we are all together as one specific product. One thing that coffee has that wine is already into the general knowledge of mind. Coffee is still in the niche. Now, if you try to go around the general knowledge, people is gonna say Colombia, and there's a reason why. One of the largest producing countries is the number 3 producing country, and still has great quality compared to the other 2 largest producers. Panama has no volume whatsoever, so it will be very hard to find Panama in the shelves of coffee places. But we do have quality. Now, the work on branding, it's a work that we started doing in Best of Panama in 2017, but we also started doing it in Lamastus Family Estates, because there's a combination of things that my father mentioned: all the quality, all the innovation, all the work, everything that you put into the business and the product itself works, right? And then you need to create a brand that identifies you, because everything you do, if you don't have a proper identity, will not last too long. Even though you are the best producer, there are. And I can think about so many that I don't really want to mention because I don't want to discredit anybody. But there are so many coffee farmers that have great product, that have come so far, and eventually they vanish. And in today's market, it doesn't mean too much, even though they have great quality coffee, because I know, because I've been in the farm, I've tasted the coffee many times. But you need to have that identity that holds you for a longer period of time. And this is something that It's needed for Panama, and it's needed for our own brands. I can control my own brand. I cannot control the association easily because it's a board, a commission, a group, but we are working towards that. We're still working. We're doing a bunch of different advisory with different experts in the luxury market. But you need to understand this product is so new in the luxury market that it's hard to get an advisor to give you the map to get to sell this as a luxury product. Now, remember something. We come from all the things that we just mentioned. We come from rural Latin America. We're not just from Latin America. We're not from Panama City. As you've seen, Panama City is more cosmopolitan. We're from rural of mountains, Panama, Latin America, in Central America. And all the coffee producers are either from Latin America, Africa, and some parts of Asia. All the coffee producing countries are really poor. So we are seen as a commodity. Even in the specialty coffee, we're still seen as a whole, as a group, as a commodity. And then what happens when you have a commodity? And I will tell you a story that happened in Italy not long ago. There's a guy in Italy, a roaster, a specialty coffee roaster, one of the few ones in Italy. And he sold a espresso for €2. And he got a fine for 1,000 euros for selling a $2, because it's supposed to be 150. 150 is too much. People protested about that. Parallel to that situation, the Italians are on a campaign of telling their citizens pay more for olive oil because this product's special. And now, in the perception of the consuming markets, wine pay a lot, olive oil pay a lot, and other products pay a lot.
Right.
Coffee, cacao, I pay a lot. This is a commodity. This cup of, like the Americans say it, cup of Joe. It generalizes. If we think like this, you're never gonna get the crisis of the sea market resolved. We can be better, but it's gonna be very individualistic, and this is not the idea. And now, two things happened in the news in the recent years because the sea market doubled. When the sea market doubled, there was a news I saw in Fox. It was New York, and they are interviewing people around New York City saying, "Oh, but now you're gonna have to pay more for coffee. What do you think about this?" And people say, "Well, I think now I'm gonna have my everyday coffee. I'll have to have it 3 or 4 times a week because I need my coffee to help me to work, and I buy my coffee at this place, but it's too expensive now." And then they do the same thing in Australia. And in Australia, the news is, they are shocked by the prices of coffee. They invite a coffee expert. The coffee expert is one of the former barista champions. And the guy comes into the news and he says, "Well, now we have a former barista champion from Australia talking about what's happening in the coffee industry." And they were expecting him to be in the same line as them. And this is the greatest thing that can happen ever for coffee. What? Why? People are not gonna be able to afford their coffee. The producers in places like Honduras, Colombia are suffering. They need a better price. Now, the reality of the increase in the price is not for the best of them. It's because the war in Ukraine, COVID, and all these things created a much more expensive, fertilizers, logistics, and so on, so on, so. So it increased the price. But the reality is, the only way we're gonna go far as a product is if we, the ones that are in the top, can include everybody else and educate everybody and tell them things that our producers are not gonna tell them. We create a luxury product, even though we're from Latin America. Our product special as those ones that you see in reading in magazines like Forbes and so. We have a special product that the olive oils they have in Italy, and we can aim for higher prices. We, meaning my father, myself, and our colleagues, not only from Panama, we have also from Colombia and other countries. And this is the when you open up the mind of the consumer, is when you can get the consumer to be able to pay more for the regular, the everyday coffee that there's so many, the everyday coffees that Lavazza and Nestle and all these companies will sell you. The producer of that coffee is suffering. It doesn't matter what they tell you in the news of that Nestle put this, put that, they are suffering. So when guys like you come into the farms and are willing to pay more, and sometimes I know that you guys are coming to the farms and are paying even more than you budgeted for, it's doing something.
You have a lot of competition.
Every time you write something about coffee in a coffee bag, or you explain something about coffee, or you do this, investing time and money in a podcast. Every time you do this, you're not helping us, you're not promoting us, you're not promoting your company, you are helping the industry grow. And one day the consumers will understand that coffee is a product that if you're in New York, if you're in Dubai, if you're in Australia, you can pay $1 more for a cup of coffee and it's not gonna ruin your economics. And it's gonna help humongously people in Africa, people in Indonesia, people in Honduras, and so on. So thinking about this, we have reached a product that is special, that is luxury in the mountains of Central America. And this is something that is not common. And we are proud of this. But now we are in a position that we need to help the rest of the industry grow. Not only specialty coffee, coffee as a whole. It's hard, but just by saying something about coffee and just by doing things like this podcast, it's doing an enormous job to grow this industry.
And on sort of that, where do you think Panama coffee community, the world specialty coffee community, where are we going in the immediate future, in the next sort of 3 to 5 years? What do you think?
Okay, so very good question, very difficult question to answer, but I tell you what, we haven't stopped. We have, every year we buy a new small farm because it's a high elevation farm.
Didn't you just buy a new farm recently?
Yeah, we bought a new one and planted it right away.
What's it called?
Lulu.
It's called Lulu.
Lulu.
And
okay.
we bought another one last year too.
Okay.
So we are planting because we are, I am very positive that the specialty coffee industry will grow. The luxury, the specialty coffee, the geishas. I tell you an example. I've been to China 2 times this year. After COVID. In China, a young guy like you sit down in a tea shop and they buy a tea, one of those nice teas that they drink there, this size, let's say the size of a pour-over or a filter coffee, 15 grams of coffee. They pay $80 for that tea and they pay $50 for a geisha. So it's not expensive. So we need to grow where there is still a lot of market, like China, for example. China is a huge market. UAE is a good market. They pay a lot of money, but they are only 10 million people.
I would say Saudi is the market.
Yeah, Saudi, the Middle East, the entire Middle East.
Saudi is a good market too, but in China, say you have Shanghai, 25 million people. You take a bullet train, east, west, north, south, 10, 50 million people right there. So you don't have to go more than 1 hour and you have 50 million people. 50 million people that you need to convince to drink more coffee. So we're planting more and more coffee. And we think that we're going to go up and the specialty coffee market is going to grow in China, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, everywhere. Because not everybody drinks specialty coffee. I have walked around and I have seen Tim's. I have seen other brands that you can replace
Big
those
brands, right? Yeah.
big brands that you can replace those with specialty coffee. You see what I mean? So there is still a lot of room to grow, but we have to do the work. But I see it very positive. We won't stop. As far as us, we won't stop investing on new technology. We did a major overhaul to our mill. You will see it when you come in. Invested a lot of money in the mill, invested a lot of money in better quality drying, and we have planted new geisha farms at higher elevations too.
I hope people is still listening at this point.
But the higher elevation.
How can we go?
Stop. Oh,
2100.
2100.
Right now, 2100. Maybe
It's difficult.
it's very difficult, but
We can leave that for the next podcast.
we can do a podcast in the farm. So
And I think we're gonna have to leave it there time-wise,
good.
guys. But thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Really
If
appreciate
people
it.
are still online at this point, there's gonna be a next episode.
I like it.
Cool.
I like it very much.
And we're done. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much because we can express ourselves.
Thank you.